welcome to Dhi Artspace's today's talk. We have a wonderful speaker with us today, Dr. Rajarshi Sengupta. So this talk is part of the ongoing exhibition that we're having at Dhi Artspace Gallery in Hyderabad. The exhibition is titled Crafting the Crossroad. And we have 5 artists participating in this exhibition. Chaturi Nisansala, 𝗥𝗷𝗿𝗀𝗵𝗶 Rajarshi Sengupta, Shruti Mahajan, and Susanna Bauer. So before I introduce our speaker of the evening, and I would like to show you a glimpse of the exhibition for those who couldn't travel to Hyderabad, who haven't seen the exhibition yet. Yes, so a small video of the exhibition. This was a very small glimpse of the exhibition, um, and now I would invite the Artspace's director, Ms. 𝗥𝗷𝗿𝗀𝗂𝗵𝗶 Gundala, to say a few words about the exhibition, about the talk series that we will be continue doing for next few weeks. Um, Over to you, 𝗥𝗷𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗵𝗶 ma'am.
Good evening. Good evening and a warm welcome everyone here. It is really a pleasure to invite you all to this talk series that we are hosting for next few weeks. And today I'm really delighted to have Rajarshi Sengupta with us to talk about this talk today called Chronicles of Making. This is one of my very favorite and also special exhibition, Crafting the Crossroad, which is curated by Somedutta Mallik. It's been one of my favorites, and it has been highly applauded. And the artist participated. She just now told us about these 5 artists: Rajarshi, 𝗥𝗷𝗿𝗀𝗵𝗶, Shruti Mahajan, Susanna, and Chaturi. It was extremely wonderful to meet few of the artists we had recently at the Hyderabad show. Unfortunately, we couldn't meet a couple of artists, but I'm happy that we are going to have this series of talks where we're going to interact with all artists each week and then continue to know about their practice and their journey and the history they have undertaken to do this, and especially to understand the influences of craft in their practice and the kind of research they underwent while working, and to know more about the journey of their art art practice which they did. I really am looking forward to listen to Rajarshi, to know more about the process of making process and the making of Kalamkari, and the kind of work he did in this particular domain is commendable. So I'm really looking forward to listen to all little stories behind stories and so many other little anecdotes. And I welcome you all to gather today, and uh, uh, and go on. Thank you so much. Thank you, Som, for doing such a wonderful show.
Thank you, ma'am. Uh, so
Over to you now.
yes, thank you. So as I told you, and as you know, that we have a very fine speaker today with us, Dr. Rajarshi Sengupta, and he's also one of the participating artists of the ongoing exhibition Crafting the Crossroad. So uh, who knows him very well uh, really doesn't need an introduction of him, but for those for those who are meeting him for the first time on this virtual platform, I would like to say a few words about him. And yes, so Dr. Rajarshi Sengupta uh, is a practitioner and art historian presently teaching at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences in the IIT Kanpur, India. Dr. Sengupta completed his PhD in art history from the University of British Columbia, Vancouver in 2019, and received the IARTS Textiles of India grant, Royal Ontario Museum, Toronto in 2017 and 18. He contributed to the catalog essay of Cloth That Changed the World, The Art and Fashion of Indian Chintz, edited by Dr. Sarah Fee in 2020. He is currently working on an edited book on Deccani material culture with Dr. Vaishali Ghosh. Welcome, Rajeshi. We are very glad to have you today. Um, and we're starting this series of conversations with you, and that gives me immense pleasure. So, without wasting much time, I would, hand over this platform to you. But before that, I would like to
I would
thank.
like to add one point here.
Yeah, sure.
This is mainly this talk series is mainly started, and this will be moderated by Somedutta, and this is mainly done to which will be accessible to all the people who could not visit the show in Hyderabad, and to know more about the artists. So who I mean, they're in they're many parts of the world. You know, one is from Sri Lanka, one is from London, and they are from different places. So we thought, you know, this is the best way to connect to each other, and you know, continue to have this talks series. Thank you. Over to you, so.
Right. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for bringing that point forth. So yes, we'll have this conversation for next few weeks, and today we are starting with Rajesh Sengupta. But before I start, I would like to thank each of you who is joining us today in this event, in this talk, and over to Rajesh now.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Am I audible? Can you hear me properly?
Yes, you are. You are.
Okay. All right. So before wasting any time, I should not share my screen so that you don't have to get bored looking at my face. All right. All right. So good evening, everyone. And thank you very much to both to Dhi Artspace, to 𝗥𝗷𝗿𝗀𝗵𝗶 and of course Somedutta Mallik for this wonderful initiatives. And we had been talking about it, and we have sort of, I really have been looking forward to see the display in the physical space, because we have been talking about it, and I have really been really interested to see that, how everything had shaped up over the last several months. So today my presentation, which is titled as Chronicles of Making, so this is certainly as part of the, as you know, the part of the exhibition project that is Crafting the Crossroads at Dhi Artspace in Hyderabad. And I will be sort of giving a glimpse about my practice, which sort of like develops as a process between my research and art making or hands-on exploration, whatever you want to call it. So this is where I start. So I call it like between desk, studio, and kitchen. And that is on my research and art making. So why I say this, the desk, studio, and kitchen, is because like we can see there are three aspects, or perhaps we can think about more than three aspects. So closely connected to life as well as art making. And we usually connect desk with like studying, with archival work, and then with studio we usually sort of connect as a workspace. I mean, I don't definitely call it always a studio, but I mean more like a workspace. And then kitchen is something that, I mean, I would like to emphasize that, I mean, this is an underrepresented part of like our art making that we definitely need to feed ourselves. But also the process that I actually go through, that dyeing, that requires a lot of engagement in the kitchen. So cooking and dyeing, these two things actually go simultaneously a lot of times. So this is how I see this, that I mean, it's not really like a linear flow that I start from my desk, then sort of take the work to the studio or to the kitchen, but sometimes it's like a back and forth movements, that it might just start somewhere and then go back to the research. So it's kind of this back and forth movement between research and practice is something that I have been interested in, and that is also something that I'd like to sort of focus on in the talk today. So on screen, we have some of the images. For example, this image of this very celebrated dye plant, and which is a drawing by William Roxborough in the left corner of the screen. And then that comes as part of my archival research, how I started shaping up my work by going through the archives and then knowing about the things that I have been working on. And then, of course, the most important and integral part is the craft makers, the artisanal communities that I have been interacting with for the last 10 years or more, and how they have been they are crucial to the preservation, at the same time like transforming the objects and life around us. And of course that, I mean, how also folds into our practice. And then of course that it comes back to my studio practice, or like, I mean, the practice in my workspace, where it kind of how making that not only just contributes to making these textiles, those are currently on display, but also that also contributes to making of knowledge, and how that also goes back to the research. So again, that, I mean, even if we can think about this flow that is from the left side to the right side of the screen, but it's not always a linear flow. Sometimes the practice also leads to the archival study. Sometimes the ethnographic work also leads to the practice, and we'll be looking into that. So for that reason, I thought of dividing this entire talk in, or like at least making few sections in this talk. And so the first, I'd start by talking about lines and canons. So line is something that, I mean, of course, as you can see that, I mean, it is integral part of anyone's practice. When we start our practice, when we start our training, lines are always very important. It can be a line with pen, a pencil, with crayon or anything else. And lines also emerge as one of the prime characteristics in my practice throughout. So how do I see that? And then the thing is that, I mean, sometimes we do not really consider that, I mean, how important it might also be, because when we think about making a line on paper, the kind of struggle it has, then like when we think about making a line on the Kalamkari fabric, or like, I mean, a fabric which will be developed in the Kalamkari process, each line would require a lot of background work. For example, how the fabric has to be washed, treated several times, either with myrobalan or like harada or karakaya, whatever you call it, and then with like full cream milk and everything. Only then the sharpest of the needle can produce a line that I desire. So that kind of like, I mean, this background work that actually goes inside, I mean, behind making each and every line, that sort of made me think about like certain aspects of making which usually go underrepresented, and how we account for that. And the same thing I would say about that, how the canals and they also become part of the artisanal lives and how they remain underrepresented. Now, one more thing that I would like to emphasize here is that whenever I have worked on this, so I have usually worked on this art making and making my research simultaneously. So in one hand, as you can, I mean, one hand I was making the this research on the tools, which is known as kalam, and on the other hand, I was exploring that, I mean, what is its implication in my practice. So coming back to the issue about canals, that what I was talking about there is that the coastal landscape in coastal Coromandel region, where I have been predominantly doing my field work. So there, like the entire landscape has many of these canals. Some of them, they start from the river and flow to the sea. Some of them, they are completely dependent on the river water. And these canals, even though they are everywhere, but still they remain underrepresented in our memory, in the histories, because they are not something that we can think about extravagant, or they are not something that is spectacular. But at the same time, those canals are the ones which perhaps brought many of the traders and the travelers to the workshops of where the artisans have been working for centuries. The canals are also something that we can find they are integral part of dyeing and washing. And that is how I started thinking in terms of that, how this canals that also create this network, and how that is something that affects the making of the work. So this is an image that is this particular work that I had on screen. This is called the Kaluva Puranamu. So Kaluva is the Telugu word for canal, and I wanted to have all these different stories about the canal on this piece of fabric. That it's not just about the traders or some of the fruits, like for example pineapple, which was not really Indian, but it was brought to the Deccan with the Portuguese travelers, so that those stories of like the intercultural exchanges, and then they meet the stories of the artisans, this mundane activities about drying the fabric, at the same time like dyeing them, dipping them, all those things, how canals are very much part of this life. So here I have some of the, I mean, here I have an image where I see that this the stories of making this very mundane act of drying fabrics in the open air spaces. And then I wanted to make this as part of this textile. So in a way that, I mean, this textile, when it was made ultimately, so that it can become a textile about textiles. So it is making this textile itself, it's sort of like, I mean, it goes through the process that the dyers and everyone who are involved in the process are part of. So it's kind of this cyclical process of making and thinking in terms of like, I mean, where it starts, or like, I mean, how does it go? So these are the kind of questions that I had in mind when I was making this textile. So this is also in a way that I can think in terms of that this overlapping of something that I have observed in the archival resources, at the same time something that I see in around me, and what are the ways to bring them together. And of course that, I mean, research articles or research has its own sort of way of looking into this issue. And then the art practice that also gives a very different kind of perspective in terms of how we can depict the stories about making, this cyclical motion and this back and forth movement between like archival text and then like what is happening around us and how to bring them together in terms of our experiences. Then the other thing that, I mean, I was also interested in to bring it forward is to think in terms of the format of the works. And to start thinking, I mean, to initiate the discussion, I wanted to show this one particular work that I have studied in the Calico Museum in Ahmedabad. And this is a floor spread. It's a Golconda floor spread from perhaps from 17th century. And if you see this, it is actually, when I studied this, it was on the floor. So as you can see, it was on the horizontal plane and definitely not displayed on the wall. And if you go close to it, you'll see that there are figures which you can see it or which you can read it from this side, but then there are figures which are upside down. So that means that, I mean, the viewers have to travel to this area in order to make sense of what is happening here. So in a way that, I mean, this format is something that, I mean, it denies that just one way of looking into it or just one way to perceive them, but there must be multiple ways. And that is something that I believe that textiles have always facilitated. And that's also something that made me interested in textiles to sort of work on further. So this idea of like, I mean, seeing things from different perspectives at the same time, like perceiving them differently has played out an important role when I was making this particular work, that is World at the Table Posh. And this is an image of that, and that is displayed in the gallery space as a canopy. So definitely we had discussion that either this work has to be as a canopy or on the horizontal plane, because this work certainly does not make sense when it is displayed on the wall. And as you can see in this one, that there are figures which you can perhaps see from you know, like our own position, but then there are also figures who seem to be like, I mean, falling from the sky. And that's because that you will have to change your position, you will have to move to the other side of the textile to make sense of what is happening there. And this is also something that made me think in terms of that how this making these textiles is not just something about seeing them or perceiving them differently, but it also make us think about our own positions, that we, I mean, these textiles take a lot of time, like several months, sometimes more than a year. And then what happens is that during this time, our positions, our locations, everything changed with it. So how do I make a textile which has only one position of the artist, whereas I'm actually changing and I'm taking this textile in my travels? So that is something that I had also been thinking about, that, I mean, there must be the different ways in which this questions can be addressed, or at least can be facilitated, this kind of discussions. So that's the reason I also wanted to focus on, or at least like emphasize this one small point about this textiles, that as you can see, this is a textile, this is the same piece that the World at the Table Posh, and this is during the making. So the entire image is not prepared by the time the photograph was taken. And this work actually started during a small vacation in Kolkata. And then I traveled to Hyderabad, and then most of the work was done in Hyderabad. And then later on, the next year, I traveled to Himachal with this work. And then I folded the work in my luggage and just took it with me. So it kind of like this idea of the movement that I had been talking about, and how that became part of the process. So that was very much there in this process as well. Now, so when I see that I mean this is something that is facilitated by the textiles, it also gives this flexibility that it does not require a particular kind of space that where I have to have certain setup, but I mean I can fold it in my bag and take it, and then after certain kind of treatment, then I can again start working on it. So those kind of flexibility is there, and that is also something that I felt that how this when at the same time when I'm carrying my books with me and reading them, and when I'm carrying these textiles with me wherever I'm going, so how all those things become part of the life, and it's not just about making the work in a dedicated space, but they travel as you travel, they grow as we grow. So from there, I'd get to the next point here, and that is about the repository of images. So this is this image which I called as Catalog Mountain. And as you can see, there is this hillock-like form, and there are many narratives which are here. So this idea of like this narratives which seem to be merging into a cohesive whole, but they do not. So that also appears in the other textile, that is World at the Table Posh, that there are so many narratives that they seem like, I mean, they have the tendency towards merging into one, but ultimately they do not. So what happens to them? So I was interested in this idea of how there are different narratives, and also like, I mean, how they make this kind of patchwork, and a patchwork of narratives, but more importantly, perhaps a patchwork of images or patchwork of knowledge, and how those patchwork that contributes to making this repository, that where you can look at and then find different kind of information that can be about memory, that can be about our histories, that can be cultural exchanges, and many different things. So those things I had in mind when I was also looking into this. I mean, I was in the process of developing this work. Now, certain specific aspects of developing was that certainly when I was also looking into the practice of making Kalamkari textiles, and this images, like the image in the upper left and in right, they come from this area around Mashipatnam in Polavaram. And so during my research there in 2015, and I still go back there, but that is the time when I started thinking in terms of that. I mean, what is a repository, and how how making itself becomes a way in which like knowledge is practiced. Knowledge is not something that is just written about and just stored in an archive, but it is something that is always activated every time you interact with the materials, every time you interact with the water. So this is how this repository, it's a living repository that is built. And then on the other hand, it's also something that came from this fantastic murals from the 𝗥𝗷𝗿𝗀𝗵𝗶 temple in Lepakshi, which is in southern Andhra Pradesh, and where we see this murals from 16th century, where a number of people and the human bodies are adorned in this fantastic textiles. And so many people have spoken about how those textiles give a glimpse of what was there in 16th century. But to me, it seems like more than that, it was a kind of repository that one, if an artisan is a practitioner, an artist, whoever, if they look into these murals, it's not just about getting a documentation of what was there in the past, but it's also about like building a repository of patterns, building a repository of the images, what we can refer to. And something that I had sort of like, I mean, taken that further when I was making this repository into this hillock form. Now, this hillock form also came from this Deccani rock formation, which we can commonly see in the Kalamkari textiles, mostly in this Mehrab or Janamas, this particular Kalamkari textiles. And one of them, close-up of that, I have kept in the right side of the image. So as you can see that each and every rock in this in this hill formation or the mountain formation, each and every of them, they have patterns in them, or like they have images. And something that I have thought that, I mean, if those are images, why not there can also be narratives, part of narrative fragments, and how they can be put together. And it doesn't necessarily they will be a cohesive whole, but what happens when we have, like, I mean, a repository of those fragmentary narratives. And something that I had also thought about when I was making particularly this image of the elephant, which was for me as a reminder of something that is coming out of this particular boundary of this area where the patterns are restricted to. So those are some of the concerns that I had in mind. But also at the same time, as I have already discussed, that this is it also came from the observations or engagement in making these textiles in the artisanal workshops and interacting with the community. So like looking into what was happening or what has been happening in the coastal workshops or in the workshops in around Deccan, and how that also became part of the repository. So here, as you can see, that the elephant moves, and it's almost like it is drawn on a piece of fabric, and then the fabric is laid out on the ground by the dyers, that the way they dry the fabric on the plain open ground. And so this is again that this idea about making and making a knowledge repository, but at the same time that making itself becomes a way in which knowledge is generated, it is sustained, and it is transformed over time. So, and then the other aspect I would like to mention here is this, the aspect about these narratives, that there are so many of these narratives. And when we think about narratives, the first thing that comes in our mind is their content. But I'd say that, I mean, more than content, there can also be different ways to look into these narratives. And a lot of times I had been looking into these narrative fragments for directions, that if you see this figures or the fragments in up close, then there are always the movement, there are always directions. If there are direction of feet that is going in particular way, or like there are direction of eyes or like face or expression, that is something for me to navigate through the entire textile. And also the way I thought that, I mean, how the viewers might also be engaged in seeing the textile or getting engaged with it. So those are some of the aspects about the narrative, about how to make a repository, which is not just about the content, but it ultimately goes back to the idea of making or idea about perceiving this textile, so that all those things come into the discussion. And this was also happening at the time when I was making this, collaboratively. I was building up this small booklet, which is called Somedutta, and it's a bilingual booklet in English and Telugu, and where many of the trace drawings of the master block carvers Gangadhar Kondra and Narsaya Kondra are kept, and then it was printed, and majority of these booklets were given to the blockmaker brothers, so that they can use it for educational purpose or to give it to the students and whoever are visiting their workshop. So if anyone is interested, I'd be happy to share the PDF of this booklet. And from there, I just briefly touch upon the work that I had been recently doing. And this is and my concern here is like a pattern that repeats. So I had studied this small set of textiles, and again early modern textiles, where I see that there are those repetitive patterns, but those repetitive patterns are not printed, but they are painted. And the question that came to my mind is about that, if the printing technology is available, then why people make the effort to paint that or like to draw that? And for that, I mean, when I go up close, then I see that, I mean, even though a lot of those things, they look similar from the distance, but when we go, when we go close to them, we find out that there are many of those subtle differences that one can see only if they are close enough to that, only if they're spending time with that. And this idea of like, I mean, something that um, um, develops over time, a pattern that repeats, and how we interact with that is something that I had been thinking in terms of whether this repetitive pattern or like this repetitive process of making these textiles or the works in general, whether what happens to them when we like take that perhaps out of one specific geographical or cultural context. Like majority of the work when I was making, then I was in partly I was in Hyderabad, and the geographical cultural context there is very different. And then by the time I started developing the works in this works, then this I was already in Kanpur, and which is drastically different landscape from where the works, like the earlier work, started shaping up. So I was I was thinking that, I mean, how this pattern, something that repeats from the past, whether that helps us to make sense of the new situation, or like, I mean, whether that also makes us think about how certain things which made sense in the past will be transformed, or where it will go. So it's not really a conclusive answer, but it's something that is part of the process. And these are some of the part of the process, as I have been talking about, that the repetitive actions, that how there were those stages in which I have dyed this fabric. So this is like the initial fabric, how it looked like. And then these are how, like, I mean, those were dyed in this to dye stuff. And then from there, this is the next step in which like those are dyed in this color and with the same dye stuff, but like more denting and everything, it went on. And then like finally it sort of looked like this. So this, as I have been saying, that, I mean, these repetitive actions, so it's not just there in the images, that, I mean, the particular segments or like particular units which repeats, but it's also the process in which like the same thing goes on, and what happens with that. So in a way, I'd say that, I mean, that this particular process that becomes also part of the thought process and work. So material exploration and the thought process, they sort of like, I mean, continue side by side. And yeah, I'd say that, I mean, I'm still in the process, and that is how it is. So thank you very much. And I'd be very happy to have your questions, concerns, comments, and everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rajarshi. This was really wonderful to know all the backstory of your practice. I'm privileged to visit your studio and know more about uh, the way you walk, the kitchen that you were talking about. So yes, I know a bit about it. But I always wanted our viewers to know how you do the work, how you make your certain pieces, and what are the inspirations that you always had uh, before you kind of conceptualize a piece or start working on it. So thank you so much for bringing all these stories to our audience today. And so I was when you were talking about your practice, and a majority of that part was about the references that you used, the kind of old pieces that you get to see in museums, in archives. As a researcher, it was your privilege as a researcher to visit these places and explore the old pieces. So I was thinking that since this archival pieces are so crucial in your practice, have you ever thought that how the craftspeople uh, think about it, or do they get a chance to see their own archival pieces, or the pieces that their forefathers made, or so how do they make their knowledge?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. And I'd say that, I mean, there are two aspects of it. So one is that, I mean, some of them are aware of certain books. And for example, if I go into the stories that, I mean, how the blockmaker duo, Gangadhar Kondra and Narsaiah Kondra, when Gangadhar Kondra was traveling to Bombay in like late 80s, that time he actually picked up this book, and which is from Kyoto Hatanaka collection in Japan. And then that book actually like opened up this world to him, that I mean, and he was like, oh, this is the Kalamkari we do, but this design seemed to be like much more complex. So what happens to that? So they, once they had this book in hand and they started like exploring it, something which is very unfortunate, that I mean, there are many of these government initiatives where the artisans are sent to these fairs, these expos and all this, but they are not really, they are not really taken to the museums, for example. And that is something that one thing I sort of like, I mean, initiated doing, and it was part of this IARTS Textile of India grant, that Gangadhar Kondra and then dye specialist Jagada Rajappa, we had the privilege to invite them and support their travel and everything else in the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. So they were able to visit there, the conservation room, the textile study room, and see some of those historical pieces from 17th to 19th centuries. And the reactions from Gangadhar Garu was priceless, that a lot of times you'd be like, oh, if I'm making them, then I'd be using a block like this, and this is how I'll be like dividing the space and everything. So he was looking at it from this maker's perspective, which we usually do not look into, because we try to look into like the what all colors are used, whether it is hand drawn or not, this and that. And he was looking at it as a challenge, that whether he can take this challenge or not. So this perspective was very interesting. So that's something that, I really hope that, I mean, those kind of opportunities we can make in the future as well, so that there are more of these discussions. And the people in the textile study room, the conservators, the curator, they also said that, I mean, they have truly enjoyed and they learned a lot from this new approach of looking into the textiles. So I think it always benefits everyone if these interactions are encouraged.
So good to know that this kind of initiatives are being taken, and I really appreciate your initiative and Royal Ontario Museum's initiative to this kind of collaborations. And yes, so I think our audience today has a lot of question to ask you and a lot to know from you. So anyone from the audience wants to ask Rajarshi anything, whoever has seen the exhibition, whoever has not, feel free to ask your question. You can type your question in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask Rajarshi directly.
May I?
Yes, please.
Hi. Thanks for the wonderful presentation, Dr. Rajarshi. Let me congratulate that the show looks great, but I'm yet to visit. I'll hopefully visit by Monday. And also happy to be reminded of Aarti Chandaria, ma'am. She was a great collector who also collected my works from Baroda, and a great supporter of textile art, of course. So my query, it's not a question, but rather I'm intrigued with the Kaluva Puranam you had mentioned, Rajshri. So, so Kaluva is translated in Telugu. You were trying to say that it meant some canal, right?
Yes.
And it also refers to this demon in Markandeya Puranam, which of course is the Kunapuli scroll, which talks about this whole Padmashali castes and the scroll narrative in it. right? So I was wondering about, is it the same Kaluva? Or if you could elaborate on that Kaluva Puranam. I mean, I found it very interesting how you have spoken about the intracultural exchange that happens through these waterways, right? So that's a very important and interesting point. So if you could let me know more about this Kaluva Puranam.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for bringing this up. And I think, I mean, the idea of me bringing the this particular term Puranamu to this mix, it was about how this aspects were underrepresented, and as if like, I mean, it had a particular kind of story associated with them, perhaps like a Purana, perhaps like a story which is more sort of like, I mean, connected to like the mainstream narratives, the stories which the institutions are interested in. So if that was the case, then perhaps like, I mean, this canals might have been more more sort of imprinted in our public memory, which is definitely not the case right now. So I was kind of like hearing all the stories from the dyers, and mostly like, I mean, the washer people and the printers, and how those canals are important, but like, no one really talks about that. And of course, I mean, I can go on about like, I mean, some of the recent issues around the pollution,
Yes.
and which started happening with like, I mean, the silkscreen colors, which does not dissolve in the water, and it becomes like like, I mean, absolutely not suited for the agricultural usage. So those things I had in mind, and that's the reason, like, I mean, putting the word Puranamu was it was kind of a pseudo way of like, I mean, putting importance on this. It's never a Purana, but it's like giving this stature so that, I mean, it looks something that, I mean, I have been building up on that. So it's a fake Purana.
Okay, but I was actually wondering whether this Kaluva Sura from the Markandeya Puranam actually originates from the Kaluva. I don't know.
That's something I'll have to look into. I mean, this scroll that you have mentioned, that also has some of the other images that which I'm really interested in, like Gandhabirunda. And of course, like, I mean, that Bhavna Rishi and the Padmashalis are very important, because most of the dyer communities, they are also like, a lot of them, they come from the Padmashali communities. So so that's the reason, like, I mean, but I still haven't found any direct connection between the scroll and like their everyday life. So something that I'd definitely be interested to explore further.
Sure. Also, I was really wonderstruck with the kind of fine drawing. So have you achieved that with the bamboo kalam, or have you used something else?
So in the bamboo kalam I have, and then I use a metallic tip, which is like, sort of like stuck to the bamboo kalam there, because I tried with the bamboo kalam many times and it does not give the kind of lines that I wanted. So so then I went to the metallic tip. But I'd say that, I mean, using metallic tip is perhaps not something that is new, because in the recent works, we do not really see metallic nibs, but in the history, there are some of them mentioned that perhaps there were some of them. And in the resist work in Pudukkottai and places in Tamil Nadu, they had metallic tips for it. So I believe that, I mean, the metallic tip as a kalam was there in use, but which is not there in the contemporary times.
Yeah, that may be true, because that fine line is not possible nowadays. And as you know, these Kalamkari artists are very secretive about their techniques. So maybe they don't share some techniques also.
I mean, usually I found them very forthcoming. I mean, I never really, had any problem with that. But yeah, like, I mean, this is the bamboo and the metallic kalam that is that came up during the work. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your questions.
Do we have any more question or observation from the audience?
It's a very basic question, Rajarshi. Why did you choose Kalamkari? You come from a state which has a very, very strong tradition of fabric and culture. How did you choose Kalamkari? against your the language barrier and many other barriers. It's the travel is also quite far off. And how did you deal with the artisans or the craft people? How did you manage with the this is a very, very basic question. I always feel, how does an artist communicate? For me, I'm looking at the whole thing as, how does an artist communicate with an artisan or a craft person, and when there is a language barrier? So I always believe in these collaborations. I always encourage these collaborations between the craft and fine artists. So what is the take on that? I mean, I just wanted to know about why did you choose this, Kalamkari?
So thank you very much for the question. And it's not really a basic question. I'd say that, I mean, it's the crux of it. It's very important to the process, actually. So in terms of working on Kalamkari, I think it's something that when I was doing my master's in HCU, and that time I sort of realized that, I mean, there was the process of looking back into my practice, and I realized that it was always the pen which I was interested in to work with. And even when I was around 2.5 years old and all, I mean, all the memories that my mother shares, that I was never interested to work with pencil. And it's something that it got in my mind that, I mean, what is it? And then I can see that, I mean, when a line is drawn with a pen as opposed to a pencil, it's something that we cannot really remove. It is drawn, that means it's drawn, it's there, and it's not going to be removed. It's just etched on the surface. And something that I think, I mean, I have also studied when, I mean, perhaps I did not study, it was something that I had been observing when growing up, and when I learned drawing from my mother. And then at the same time, I'd see that simultaneously she would use needle for doing the kantha embroidery just during her pastime. And this sharpness of the needle is something that I think, I mean, it left a huge impact on my practice. And then in the art school, I was trained in printmaking, and printmaking is something where I have sort of used more and more use of line hatching, and then what extent a line can take you to. And then also this indirect processes. It's not something that I can apply color on the top of the paper and then it will be achieved. But printmaking is an indirect process in which everything that perhaps is imprinted somewhere else, and then that gets into a different surface. And then also the preparation of color and everything. That definitely got me into the Kalamkari printing, and something that where I can see that, I mean, it's a chain of indirect processes like mordanting, resisting, washing again and again, then boiling, and finally achieving some result. Or it might not be a good enough result. So that's something, this process which sort of engages is something which caught my attention. And with time, I sort of emphasized that and got involved in it more and more. And in terms of the interaction with the artisans, I find that, I mean, there are always some way or other to do it. And initially, when I started interacting, then I'd probably just use some broken Telugu, which I picked up from my days in HCU, or some of the words that perhaps I have seen in the popular movies and songs. And then slowly I have, learned writing and reading in Telugu, and sort of also a little bit more on speaking. So that is how I have been continuing. But I think, I mean, the language is definitely a barrier on the first day, on the second day, perhaps the third day. But then there is somewhere or other we start learning. And it usually, I have seen that, I mean, if I'm spending extended period of time in the artisanal workshops or with the communities, then language is definitely not the foremost thing that I am concerned about. So I think, I mean, this is something that I have found, and one thing I'd just like to mention about like the kind of collaborations, or like, I mean, any kind of relationship that happens between artists and artisans, is that we need to spend time. That it cannot be done as a workshop, but I mean, extended period of time we have to do like back and forth, or like we have to stay there for quite some time, and that is the only way to understand that, I mean, what better way we can think about their lives, and how that can be connected with ours. So yeah, that those other things, I guess, like, I mean, are kind of have been important to my practice, and thanks for asking the question about it.
That's something which are really very, very nice to hear, and so relevant, so relevant. I was always wondering, why would Raj come all the way, with all this, and he took up something which as a challenge. So very nice, very nice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. But also, I mean,
Thank
I'd
you.
say that I have been, supported thoroughly by the block makers, the printers, the dyers, all of them. And without their support, it would not have been possible. Absolutely not.
I think here I would like to add something from my own experience of working with artisans and craftspeople, is that the language is never a barrier. Maybe it's in the initial days, but the trust is most important. Once they trust you, they will start opening up. They will start sharing their secrets. No matter what language you speak or they speak, but it's a trust and the love that you build over the days or years with the craftspeople, with your collaborators. So, do we have any more question, observations, appreciation for Rajarshi today, or else we
I
will?
think there
Okay,
is
there is a
this
yes.
question about the Sampada PDF. So you can directly write me to the email ID, or I can share it with Dhi Artspace, and you can get it from there.
I think Rajarshi, you can write your email ID in the chat
Okay.
box so that people can reach out to you. So if we don't have any more question today for Rajarshi, then I would like to end the session by thanking Rajarshi for this wonderful presentation and a lot of concerns that we tried to address in the exhibition Crafting the Crossroad, and Rajarshi talked about some of them. And I hope that in the following talks that we will be having in the next few weeks, we'll also come up with such concerns and issues that we tried to address in the exhibition. And about the next talk, you will get to know about it on our social media, Instagram, Facebook, and we'll update it on our website as well. So yeah, stay tuned, and more will come soon. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Rajarshi, once again for this beautiful presentation, illustrated presentation and talk. And yes, so bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the organizers, and also to all of you for making this evening possible. So thank you.